Thank you. Mr. Weeks.
Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Forbes, and distinguished members, thank you for having us. I'm Grier Weeks, Executive Director of the National Association to Protect Children. We're a grassroots organization that is active in the states and now in Washington on this federal issue. I'm going to depart from my remarks just to be brief here. I'm going to focus on the one thing that this Congress is consistently not hearing year after year in these hearings, and that is a frank assessment of the state of readiness of law enforcement at the federal, state, and local level. Let me begin by reviewing what we know about the magnitude of this crisis. First, we know that there are hundreds of thousands of individuals within the U.S. right now actively engaged in these crimes, hundreds of thousands. The Department of Justice has testified before Congress to this, and as you've heard from Agent Waters, this is a matter of fact. Second, we know that these individuals are responsible for hundreds of thousands of child victims in the United States. Everything we know about the rate of victimization, the number of victims, tells us that if there are 500,000 people out there trafficking in child pornography, that you're talking about hundreds of thousands of child victims. Third, we know that these hundreds of thousands of perpetrators are committing millions of crimes. That's important because the volume of crimes is the best indicator we have of what is essentially a market demand, a crushing market demand for more and more product, which can only be provided by the rape and torture of more children. The most important thing, perhaps, that we know is that we can prevent this. This is entirely unnecessary. Because of the innovative law enforcement techniques that Agent Waters has talked about, the FBI is engaged in, we know where these guys are. And there is no reason in the world why these children should continue to suffer because we won't get up and go get them. Only a token of these cases, as you've heard today, are ever investigated. According to the FBI, in the 6.5-year period between FY 2001 and mid-2007, the number of suspects identified and arrested by the FBI for online child exploitation crimes was 5,048. The ICAC program, comprised of 46 task forces nationwide, reports just over 2,000 arrests in FY 06. We don't have reliable numbers on ICE and Postal, but they would be considerably smaller. All of this, though, is no fault of these heroes that are out there on the front lines doing this work, and I want to emphasize that clearly. As of July 11th, the FBI's Innocent Images National Initiative, based in Calverton, had just 32 staff, including 13 agents. Now, in previous congressional testimony, the FBI and the Department of Justice have emphasized essentially the full-time equivalents. But I think it's important that this committee understands the very inadequate, grossly inadequate size of this unit itself. The Innocent Images congressional appropriation last year was $10 million. That's less than half of what HUD gave to Jersey City, New Jersey for housing and community development. In FY 06, the budget for the entire ICAC task force program, which is a tremendous success, was $14.5 million. After years of administration neglect and mounting congressional scrutiny, the Department of Justice has finally increased that by $11 million, but we're still talking about a quarter of one bridge in Alaska, the bridge to nowhere. Law enforcement also suffers from a critical lack of forensic resources at every level, in your states and at the federal level. We hear again and again people waiting 8 months to get a hard drive analyzed. How is this possible? How, in a country where you can't go a single night without hearing about sex offenders, we've got TV shows about sex offenders, how is it possible that we can have a flourishing criminal marketplace in children and that goes on with impunity? Let me take a stab at that, and I'll conclude with our insight into why this has been allowed to happen. In 1996, the World Wide Web really took off. That was the year that the public became aware of it and started to use the World Wide Web. That was also the year that Megan's Law was passed, which is a good piece of legislation. But I want to point out that Megan's Law, which imposed a form of citizen supervision on released sex offenders, became essentially the whole paradigm for how this country thinks about child sexual abuse. It became the way we talked about it, the way we legislated about it. And it was popular because it was enormously, it was cheap, it was irresistible to the media, and it was popular. As that decade wore on and we talked consistently about registered sex offenders, child pornography exploded. Children became a commodity in an underground economy, and law enforcement continued to fall farther and farther behind. Law enforcement was not given the personnel, the equipment, the training, the forensic labs, or any of the other support they needed to go find these kids and rescue them. Year after year, we heard unbelievable rhetoric. The administration talked tough, but refused to support law enforcement. Year after year, they refused to even shoot straight with Congress about what the resources really were and what they needed. It got so bad that finally last year, Congressman Joe Barton from Texas practically begged the Department of Justice to tell them what they needed from Congress. It was apparently useless. By the end of the Megan's Law decade, America ended up with an enormous surplus of rhetoric about sex offenders and a severe deficit of resources to do anything about them. We were spending millions hunting for sex offenders who failed to register their addresses while ignoring legions of new sexual predators whose locations we do know. We were doing the things that cost the least and sound the toughest while neglecting the things that cost real money and could save the most lives. Now the 110th Congress has the opportunity to do what the 109th Congress and this administration did not. Fight back, pay what it costs, disrupt this market, and go get these children. You have the opportunity to show America in 50 state legislatures a little less talk and a lot more action. You can launch the toughest offensive against child sexual predators this nation has ever seen. It will also be the largest child abuse prevention campaign in history. And I'll just add that millions of American taxpayers from all walks of life will be behind you 100%. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weeks.